try to settle down. We're going to get started here pretty soon. Wow, big crowd. This is certainly a hot topic. So I wanted to welcome you all and thank you for coming this evening. It's great to see such a big turnout. I know it means a lot to the community here, especially the local neighbors. And this is the Coastside Sea Rise and Erosion Forum. I wanted to thank Barbara Riching. Is she out here somewhere where I could introduce you? Where is she? Could you wave? Oh, okay. So thank you so much for your generosity in providing this space for us. I can't think of a better place to have this meeting. So if we could all give Barbara a round of applause. And I'd also like to thank our sponsors. We have Surfrider, Sierra Club, and the Committee for Green Foothills. And you probably noticed we have some tabling going on in the other room with information about what some of these organizations are doing. Also wanted to thank the Pacifica Beach Coalition, and they are here tabling as well, and they do a terrific job cleaning up the beaches from Pacifica all the way through the Coastside. So thanks for that. So I wanted to start by reminding everyone that we're here to learn from our guest speakers. We do have 3 speakers tonight. I have had an opportunity to look over their presentations, and there's a lot of information to cover. So we're going to try to get into it pretty quickly. I'd like everybody to please be sensitive and respectful. Erosion and sea level rise are serious concerns that impact our neighborhoods, our businesses, our families, our homes, beach access, the coastal trail, and of course Highway 1. So let's keep in mind that we are all in this together and be respectful. We're going to be taking questions at the very end. So after all three presentations are completed, we will have a Q&A segment. And we are going to have speaker cards, which some of you may already have. They're index cards where you can write down questions. I'll be passing some more cards out. If you raise your hand, I'll pass out a card so you can write down a question at any time during the presentation. It's possible we may run out of cards, in which case we'll just have to improvise. And then I did also want to mention that there will be future meetings on related topics. We'll be holding meetings with the Mid-Coast Community Council and the Harbor District, and the county as well has been holding meetings on sea level rise. And when it comes to coastside issues, of course, erosion is really at the forefront of everybody's minds when it comes to concerns about sea level rise. So look for more meetings and more opportunities for discussion. I did want to introduce Mary Lorenas. She's a legislative advocate for Surfrider Foundation, San Mateo County, and she's going to say a couple words about sea level rise and bring our attention to what our young people are thinking, and also the fact that this is a problem that's affecting the coastside and will continue to affect the coastside as well as the bay side of our county. So Mary?
Thank you, Sabrina. So yes, I'm Mary Lorenas. I'm the legislative advocate for Surfrider Foundation, San Mateo County chapter. On May 10th, I was at the Board of Supervisors meeting, and I heard the most awesome presentation by some teenagers. They discussed the impact of sea level rise on their homes in East Palo Alto. And their presentation was part of the YES program, which is Youth Exploring Sea Level Rise Science Project. It's part of the Office of Sustainability outreach efforts to raise awareness of sea level rise in San Mateo County. And what really struck me was not just the power of the data that these young people came up with, but how they spoke from the heart, from their fears of what may happen if the sea rises to the extent where East Palo Alto is gone. And one of the things they spoke about is it will take out their churches. And they said that church in East Palo Alto is just not a place for faith. It is a community center. It's where people go to get help. It's where people go to get food, where they go to get clothing. It's an integral part to East Palo Alto. They talked about losing their parks, their schools, their playgrounds, but also all the places where just young people hang out and meet. And so it was just awesome to really hear young people talk about their fears around sea level rise, because if you look around the room, there's no young people in this room. We're all adults. And so, sorry? I don't see any 16, 17-year-olds in here. But these kids also got up in front of the Board of Supervisors, which can be daunting, and spoke their minds. So I think one thing that's really important about this conference that Sabrina's sponsoring and everybody's sponsoring is that as adults, we need to let these young people know that we've got their back. San Mateo County is serious about sea level rise, and we need to get the message to them that they're going to be taken care of. So thank you.
So next, I would like to introduce our District 3 Supervisor, Supervisor Don Horsley.
Thanks, Sabrina. I feel like I had to park in Redwood City. When Mary talked about the YES program, I used to be one of my first jobs, I was a science teacher. And so that's one of the reasons that we funded this program, because we thought, they're the future. And most of us, really the past, and they're going to have to deal with this a lot more so than us. And so the county, and I'm not going to take a lot of time, but one of the things the county did is create this Office of Sustainability. We've hired climate action specialists. And there's also on the base side, there's a measure called Double A, and it's it's roughly a $12 a parcel tax. I'm not here to, proselytize for it. But the point is, we're going to need a lot of money, at least on the base side, and also on the coast side, to be able to protect property and valuable resources, recreational resources. Now, in the long run, we may not be able to protect it, but we will try to do everything we can, at least in the meantime. And eventually, if sea level rise does rise to 3 feet, it will overtop a number of areas. And but before that happens, we're going to try and maintain everything that we can. So, for example, we have a project that's probably going to take a couple of years to actually work out with the Coastside, with the Coastal Commission, that is, to protect Marauder Road. We know that this is a valuable resource, recreational resource. We don't want that road going. And obviously, there's also lots of utilities in that roadway as well, so we'll protect that. The other project that was Surfers Beach, and it turns out that it's actually the Highway 1 in a lot of areas is like a berm protecting us from sea level rise, right? Bob Patalio has kind of educated me to this fact. If Highway 1 was severed in half, some parts of El Granado would flood now. So we worked with the city of Half Moon Bay, the county, and Caltrans. We've actually got a pretty good fix on that road, but it's not going to last forever. It's going to last maybe 50 years. And after that, it probably is going to fail, and the road's going to have to move eastward. And there's a lot of other parts of Highway 1 that are going to have the same problem. And I see John Kaner from the city of Pacifica. Pacifica has tremendous amount of damage from not necessarily only sea level rise, but also from the increasing power of king tides. So up and down on the coast side here, we're gonna have to work together. We're gonna have to really study this. We're gonna have to figure out what we do in the meantime, and there will be some areas that we have to abandon. That's just the way it is. But I congratulate Sabrina in putting together this conference. I think it's really good for us. The first thing to get is knowledge, to know what we have to deal with, and to make decisions. And the decisions are going to have to be made by not necessarily the government, but it's also made by citizens like you. So the Coastside, you guys are always the best in terms of turnout. Other cities, to some extent, are not as aware of this, but you are acutely aware of it because you live it every day. So with that, let's turn back to Sabrina.
So I did want to thank Supervisor Horsley for being here this evening, and we're really fortunate that we have a supervisor who pays very close attention to coastside issues, so thank you. Next, I wanted to introduce Ed Lorenas. He's the chair of Surfrider Foundation, San Mateo County, and a director of Committee for Green Foothills. He's going to be introducing our three speakers this evening, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about Ed. Ed has a BS in oceanography and chemistry from Humboldt State University. He has worked as a research scientist in biotechnology for over 30 years, most recently as a project lead for DuPont Industrial Biosciences. He led a multinational, multidisciplinary team of scientists in the development of biofuels. He has been chair of the Surfrider Foundation in San Mateo County since the early 90s. Under his guidance, the chapter has had a successful history of coastal protection and advocacy focusing on public access and education. Surfrider volunteers have sampled and tested the water quality of beaches and streams in San Mateo County for over 15 years. Ed is also on the board of the Committee for Green Foothills. Their mission is to protect the open space, farmland, and natural resources of San Mateo County and Santa Clara counties through advocacy, education, and grassroots action. So, Ed?
Okay, I have a list of elected and other officials that I'm going to read, and it might take about half the meeting because we have. Actually, I'm very stoked to see that all these people are here because they all have a vested interest in some way or another on what's happening with sea level rise. And I'm going to say one word on that, just from my own point of view, is that what we're seeing now is more impacts on just significant weather events, which are also go hand in hand with sea level rise. And so what we're seeing now is mostly significant weather events, and as sea level rises, we're going to have more of both. And so when you hear the speakers, think about that. So so if I may ask let's see, how should we do this? How about I'll read the names, and as I read them, if you would, please just stand up so people can see who you are. And if I miss some of you, it's because there was a list over here, but somebody snuck in through the back door. So if you would, please stand up and introduce yourself at the end. So we have Dave Olson from MCC. Hold your applause till the end or we'll be here all night. Harvey Rarbach, Half Moon Bay Fire District. Rick Lohman, GCSD, Granada Sanitary District. Mark Johnson, California Coastal Commission. Steve McGrath, SMC Harbor District, General Manager. Janine Mann from Coastal Commission. Kelsey Ducklow, California Coastal Commission. Gail Erickson, MCC. Laura Stein, MCC. Tom Matouche, San Mateo County Harbor District Commissioner. Dan Haggerty, MCC. Neil Mariles, San Mateo County Parks Commission. Debbie Rudak, Half Moon Bay City Council. Sue DeGree, Pacifica City Council. Bridget O'Farrell, San Mateo County Democrat Central Committee. Catherine Slater Carter, Montero Water and Sanitary District. And Lisa Ketchum, MCC. So, are there any folks that I missed? Yes, please.
I'm John Keener from Pacifica City Council.
Thank you. There's someone in the back.
I'm Joe Dentler from Secretary. We can't hear them. Joe Dentler with Senator Hill's office.
So thanks, Joan, for being here. Joan Dentler with Senator Hill's office.
And anyone else? Leonard.
Leonard Warren, Renata Community Services District. I got the name right?
Let's see. Nope, this is mine. Okay, so now I can introduce our speaker. Dan Hoover, PhD. Dan is an oceanographer with the U.S. Geological Survey, Pacific Coastal and Marine Science Center in Santa Cruz, studying coastline evolution and managing beach and nearshore bathymetry survey programs at several sites in California, including Santa Barbara, northern Monterey Bay, and at Ocean Beach, San Francisco. Dan holds a PhD and MS in oceanography from the University of Hawaii and a BS and ME in engineering from Harvey Mudd College. Dan has worked on a wide variety of biological, geochemical, physical, geological, oceanographic research projects at coastal sites in Hawaii, across the Pacific, and along the California coast. Prior to returning to graduate school to study oceanography, he worked as an engineer on the space station and space shuttle programs. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I gotta say, it's actually really a treat to be here. Usually you go to meetings and you get turnout, and this is pretty awesome. Sure, is this on? Yes. Okay, let me turn this on. Okay, and I will say that when Sabrina got in touch with us and wanted someone from USGS to come out to talk, all we had was a title for the meeting, and I emailed her and I said, what do you want me to talk about? There's a few things here, I listed them that we do, and she wrote back and said, that all sounds great. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to go through and kind of give you a taste of all the different things that the USGS is currently doing up and down this stretch of coastline, a little bit of some historical stuff that's relevant to this area. And I'll give you a sampling of the kind of things that we do and that we can measure and we can try to understand and why we're doing it. And then I'll switch over and talk a little about what was just discussed here about climate change, sea level rise, the changes that we expect to see in storms in the future and in the frequency of El Niños, and tie that back into the El Niño we're just finishing with and some data we've got from that so you can see how we fared this winter compared to previous winters. And then I'll wrap that up just by going back to the projections for what we expect to see in this area in terms of sea level rise, and what the aggregate effects of that are like to be. And I gotta say, this is a great place to be because I'm watching dolphins just jump out there in the water. This is amazing. So I'll wrap it up with just that kind of what we're looking at for the next 35 to 85 years in terms of what people who do climate change research, which is not me, full disclosure, are predicting for this area. And then we'll turn it over to James to talk about the details of what's going on in this area that you all probably mostly came to hear. There's a long list of names up here because I'm going to talk about a lot of different projects that are not my thing. I, as the intro said, mostly do a lot of beach surveying and nearshore bathymetry mapping. But we have a pretty big group that's doing a lot of diverse things. Some of these people are actually not USGS people anymore, but their stuff's in here, so I'm going to include that. And half this presentation is Patrick Barnard's slides, so he gets a co-authorship up there.
Must be blocked.
Is it blocked? There we go. Okay, so why do we do this? This is one of the questions I get when I'm on the beach, and one of the benefits of being here is I rarely have time to really go into this stuff on the beach when we're working because we're on a schedule. So I can tell you guys all at reasonable length why we're doing what we're doing. And the basic reason is because you guys live here, you know that the beach changes all the time. Sometimes it's problematic when it erodes the road, but summer to winter things are changing, day to day things are changing depending on storms and what's happened with the recent history of rainfall. So we've got a lot of natural forces that are driving what's going on along the coast. So it's changing all the time. And it changes on longer and longer time scales as we get out into El Niños, into even longer time scales that are related to long-term changes in climate, glacial, interglacial cycles, tectonic uplift. There's actually a lot of terms you can put into the equations that try to predict what's going to go on here on the coast. And then in addition to that, of course, there's what we're really here to talk about, the human contributions. And our job is to try to tease those out, try to understand the systems in terms of how they're functioning naturally, and then figure out what part of their behavior is due to our interventions, for better or for worse. And that's not always a straightforward problem. And the main root of that problem is often we simply don't understand the natural system itself to begin with. And we have a habit as a species of going in and tweaking the dials on this big machine before we actually understand how it works, and we find out that something happened and later on we go try to fix it. Our job as the USGS is to try to go in and collect the data that allow us to actually come up with enough of an understanding of these systems to actually predict how they will behave as we change things. All right, the stuff that we do, this is one of my favorite things. Our slogan is Science for a Changing World, and that's fairly recent they came up with that. I thought that was just awesome, because that's what we live in. We live in a changing world, and the whole point of science is really just to understand it impartially. You know, we have a mandate actually not to take positions on political positions, on projects, anything. We come in, we collect the data, we try to understand it as best we can, as purely as we can, and then hand that off to the decision makers, which are the engineers, you know, who are going to come up with solutions, and the people we elect to represent us to figure out how best to implement those solutions. All right, these are the areas I'm going to talk about. Beach and nearshore monitoring.
Bob, I think you're going to have to point the mic a little more further away from that speaker.
Okay, all right. All right, beach and nearshore monitoring. We also do experiments occasionally. We put out instruments in the water to measure currents and pressure and waves to try to understand what's forcing sediment transport. Bluff erosion, which is obviously highly relevant here. A tricky thing to actually measure because it's hard to get up on a bluff and actually measure it. We've got some new methods that we're pretty excited about that are actually helping us to do the measurements. The modeling we'll talk about in a minute. And then we're doing a pretty extensive effort on numerical modeling to look at the combined effects of sea level rise, storms, and tides on coastal flooding in a very dynamic way that includes all the physics of a storm event and includes the history of storm events by incorporating a long time series of storm scenarios to actually predict along a coastline what's going to happen to that area. And there's a bunch of those names on the initial slide are working on this. They did this down in Southern California. The next thing they did was a section from here, north, across the mouth of the Golden Gate up to Tomales Bay. We'll talk about that a little bit. And then finally, throughout this, we're pretty fortunate actually that we tend to be able to have access to a lot of the new technology that's coming out to develop new tools to make these measurements and figure out how to better get these measurements and then to use them to make useful predictions. Okay, these are the three main areas that we work in. Up at the top, Ocean Beach is up here somewhere. Monterey Bay, we just recently started working there a couple years ago. That's my home, Santa Cruz. Down in Santa Barbara, these top and bottom circles we've been working for about 12 years. We've got pretty good time series of how the beaches down in those areas are evolving. And then this strip right along here is a recently initiated effort by John Warwick in our office, who is flying a plane up along the coast and taking aerial photographs that I'll talk about in a few minutes to actually do bluff monitoring, which you guys are going to, I think, be excited to see. This is what it looks like when you go out to do a beach topographic survey. So if you see somebody driving around on the beach in an ATV, we're not hot rodding. We get the calls that some guys out there doing donuts on the beach. It's actually really pedestrian and really pretty boring. Although I can't tell you how many times people have come up to me and said, I want your job, you know, how do you get this job? It is a great job, I'm not saying that, but when you drive this grid pattern for about 5 hours and you're going about 6 miles an hour and watching out for people and birds and all that stuff, it's not that exciting. In fact, I don't even get to check out the waves. You know, you'd think I'm at Ocean Beach, I get to see the waves. I couldn't tell you what the conditions are like. But what we do is we drive around with the GPS on the back, and if you get enough coverage over here, you can take that back and put all those points into the computer and generate a 3D surface over here of what the beach surface looks like. And the beautiful thing about that is that you can do a couple things with that. One is these lines right here are the mean sea level and mean high water lines. That's a fixed elevation relative to some sea level data. And we can look at how these lines move back and forth across the beach as they erode and accrete. And we've done this, I think, about 168 times now at Ocean Beach. So we have a pretty good record of how those lines move back and forth. We can also take this surface over here and subtract it from the surface that we had before that. We can actually give you a volume for how much sand has moved around on that beach. So there's a lot of things we can do with these data, and we've got a lot of these data. That's for doing the beach surface modeling. What they're not good at is getting down here. These are the dunes. We don't drive up in the dunes. The bird people don't like it. We don't like to do it. We don't want to trash the dunes. And it doesn't give you good data anyway. So we've got some other methods I'll talk about that are useful for that. We also want to get the part of the sand that's adjacent to the beach but underwater, because that's connected to the whole system. It's all moving around there. And it's the waves that are actually pushing the sand around. So to do that, what we have is the same type of GPS system that we have on the ATV, but it's on a jet ski, and it's got an echo sounder hooked in underneath, and it all goes through a computer and comes up to a display up here. So we can drive along and see where the bottom is. It gives us very precise centimeter scale depth information on where the bottom is. We can't drive around just randomly as easily on the jet skis as we can on the ATVs. So to do the jet ski work, we follow these fixed lines, and we do the same lines every time. And what we have on the right here is the lines, but then these blue lines are where we actually collected data. You'll see in here there's this much denser coverage area. And the reason that's in there, as Bob knows, is the Oceanside sewage treatment plant is right in here, right about there. And there's been a lot of erosion issues in here. And we've actually done a lot of additional experiments and things in this area. And we wanted to get much better resolution of the bathymetry in there to see how the bottom's evolving over time. So we do that when we can. And I'll show you some of the results of that. This is, let me just go back and show you which lines these are. This is line 8 and line 12, so here and here. So right on the north edge of this area and kind of about in the middle here in front of the sewage treatment plant. And this is just a collection of all of the profiles from the land side out to the offshore side that we've collected along these lines since we started back in 2004. And what you see when you look at these, besides a snarl of lines, is this winter here in red, January 25th we were out, and you see this bar and trough that forms out there in the winter. And Bob loves that because that makes the waves really good. But what was interesting about this particular winter is you'll see this is about as deep as we've ever gone with that bar at this site. And out here it was the deepest we've ever gone on line 8. There have been some bigger bar to trough distances here. But what this allows us to do is look at how this, what we call a cross-shore profile, evolves over the season and with particular storms. And what's interesting here too is if you look back, this is June, the prior summer. These profiles are a lot flatter, much smaller bars. This one up here has actually multiple bars in it as it goes in. But what happens is in the summertime, as those waves drop off, these bars start to get smushed out and all this sand starts to return to a more kind of a uniform profile. And a lot of that sand migrates back up on the beach. So what you guys see normally is in the summertime, the beaches get wider, that sand migrates up. In the wintertime, the waves come in, strip it off, and pull it up, push it into these bars. So in a simple system, that's all it would happen, was just go back and forth. I don't know too many systems that are that simple, that just go back and forth. Okay, now this is the what you get when you take all of that high resolution data that I showed you before and you create the same kind of surface that we did with the topographic data. This is the summer picture here. It's pretty flat, it comes out, and there's some residual little wiggles here in the contour lines that are the residue of the previous winter's bars. Over here is the winter data, and you can see it's all on the same color scale. So this purple-white here is this big trough that extends all the way through that zone, and outward goes to blue here again, and it's the crest of that offshore bar that forms. Okay, so I'll stop with talking about the collection of that data for a minute and just run through a bunch of the other things that we collect. We have done some work up here with instrument deployments in the harbor and offshore, looking at currents and waves to support the Army Corps' modeling efforts. To do that, we build tripods like this, and we put instruments on them, and we put them off the back of a boat, and we come back in a month or 2 months and retrieve them and pull the data off of them. We've had instruments out in the surf zone here, current meters and pressure sensors. We do some really cool high-resolution multi-beam bathymetry mapping. This is out the Golden Gate. There's some beautiful maps, if you've never seen them, that have been generated out. It's like these massive underwater dune fields. This is a camera we have up on the top of the cliff house at the north end of Ocean Beach. If you guys know where that is. It's a scientific camera, and this, even though it looks like a blurry picture, is actually has a purpose. If you blend all the images together and average them together, The parts that are still dark is where there was no wave breaking. So you can see where the rip currents are and where the troughs are inshore of the waves in here. So that's just an example. There's all kinds of things you can do with the photographs. Over on the far side is sediment. We do collect sediment. We don't just kind of build models about it. We actually go out and measure it. That's a grab that's sediment collected from a boat on the top. This is actually a camera with a macro lens. You can actually just push down on the surface of the sand, get this image and run it through a program, and it'll calculate the grain sizes of the sediment there. So instead of having to do all this stuff in the lab, you can take a picture and do it on a computer in a fraction of the time. So we've got a lot of other things going on, but I won't take a lot of time to go in here because we want to move on to talking about bluffs. The first thing, some of you probably know this already, there has been a historical, an effort to look at the historical data on the coast of California and look at bluff erosion. And this was the National Assessment of Shoreline Change. It looked at aerial photos from 1929 to 1998, digitized the cliff edge on those, and looked at how that cliff edge changed over time, and used that to generate maps along the whole coast of what was happening in terms of bluff erosion. These are what the maps look like. So San Francisco south is this area along the peninsula here. Over here, there's Pillow Point. There's Martin's Beach. So we're kind of about right in here. I think the harbor is right in here. There's a break, obviously. So what's sort of striking about this is that on this scale, down here, that's a half of a meter per year of erosion. And the top scale is total erosion over the study period, which was what, about 70 years. Doesn't really stand out here in that record up to 1998. Now 1988 is still 20 years ago almost now. So things that are going on now were not in this record. So that's available for historical context. And this is the newer stuff, and this is where it gets really interesting for me. I told you we can't drive up on the dunes, we can't drive up on the bluffs, but there are remote sensing ways to get data off of those. The top one, Lidar, has been around for a long time. It's light detection and ranging. It's a laser, and it's a super fast laser. It's out there, it's flying around, and it's collecting the returns off all these laser pulses, and you're getting these very high density maps of distance. The images are spectacular. I mean, they're really beautiful. You can get them where you've got a simultaneous camera image, you can overlay color, you can get a beautiful 3D image of what's going on. The problem with this is it's really expensive. It's a couple $100,000 for the instrument to do it. And then you got to have somebody trained to operate it. And for these ones here, this is an aerial LiDAR flight. So for that, you've got to have another 100 grand or so for an inertial measurement unit to be able to actually get the position of the thing so accurately that you're not just fuzzing all your numbers as you fly along and collect the data. So we know how to do it. They just finished it, a whole new run up the entire coast for this El Nino winter. They did the whole stretch. But it's a lot of money and it doesn't get done very often. I think we've got 98. I think there was one in between there to 2010, and then we got one now in 2015. So you can look at change with that. It takes several months for them to process the data and get it back and look at it. But then you can do cool stuff like this. You can do the same kind of subtractions I was talking about. You've got a 3D surface, you can subtract it from the previous one. You can color code the difference and get this kind of image where the red stuff is erosion and the blue stuff is accretion. And you might look up here and wonder, what's all this blue stuff doing up here? There's probably nothing accreting on the top of the bluffs. That's vegetation growing. So, plants grew in 10 years, they got bigger, they showed up as accretion. But all this stuff down here along the edge here is actual erosion of the bluffs. Down here on the beach, it's erosion and accretion of sand moving along the beach, which is typically how it does work at Ocean Beach, which is what this is from. Over here is the glider port at Fort Funston. Over here is the sewage treatment plant. Now, down below is something that is pretty recent that John Warwick in our office has been really just jumped on, has been working really hard on. This is a way to generate the same kind of data, but using just straight up photographs. You can shoot these with your iPhone. This is a software package that essentially is like stereo photographs, but on steroids. So if you have multiple photographs of everybody in this room from different positions, and you put this in the program, it'll look around and it'll say, that's Bob in that photograph, that's Bob in that photograph, that's Bob in this other photograph. but his position relative to somebody sitting next to him is going to change a little bit in each photograph. And the program can figure that out and use that to get the depth dimension in that model. And we can produce a spectacular 3D model of this room. And it's not quite that simple, but it does actually work really well. It's not super expensive, it's not $200,000. And you can fly a plane, which is what John is doing right now. He'll be up here next week. He's going to fly this whole stretch of coastline from Monterey Bay up to the mouth of the Golden Gate and collect photos. This is from older photos. You see this is from 2002 and 2010. There's been a project ongoing called the California Coastal Records Project, where they've been doing aerial photos of the coastline since before 2002, actually. But the quality of the photos before 2002 isn't quite good enough to do this kind of analysis with. Even with these photos, you see in these areas that are gray, here, there wasn't enough overlap in the photos, because it wasn't designed to do this, to get the 3D out. But with this, you see how good the match is on this. I mean, you get the same kind of behavior here as you do down here, and for a fraction of the cost. One of these airplane flights is about $750. So I will show you one more of these over here, down at the base of Fort Funston. I don't know if any of you get up there. There's a stormwater outfall down there on the beach. That's this kind of blocky structure right there on this red patch here. And both of these is in this next slide, in theory. Or not. Oh, there we go. Okay. We'll get back to it. Okay. So this is the actual photos here, 2002 and 2004 from the California Coastal Records Project. This is the model that's built in the computer, so it looks a little fuzzy because you lose some resolution because it isn't perfect at getting overlap and everything. But you still have a very, very reasonable image of what's going on. And you can see the landslide in here. You can see this big slump that's sitting in there. And then you can go over, and like I said, you can do the subtraction here, and you can get this difference model here. And there's some pretty impressive differences there. They don't count differences in this that are less than half a meter, because that could be within the noise of the technique. But you're seeing, and this is perpendicular to the face, depth changes in there that are on the order of 8 meters in the worst case. So this is a really powerful technique that we're really just kind of getting a handle on. We're collecting these data monthly up at Ocean Beach and some areas around there where there's erosion. And he's doing these flights. He's trying to get them once a month. The data for this particular area, I will say, only go back to February, was the first pass he ran through here. He did another one in March. So he's got those data that will be getting processed at some point, so we'll be able to see what happened at least between February and March, and then what happened between February and the last set of coastal records photos, which I think was 2013. All right, so that's the data we collect. What do we want to do with it? What we really want to do with it is predict what's going to happen. We can look at what's already happened, and that gives us a lot of information, but what we really want to do is figure out what's going to happen next. So cliff modeling is a notoriously difficult thing. You can do it in a computer in idealist sense to some degree, but the reality of what happens with cliffs is they don't fail smoothly. It's not like beach sand that kind of just slushes all around when the waves come in. You know, a cliff sits there and sits there and sits there, and then one day it just collapses. So we do have a postdoc in our lab who came in the last couple of years named Pat Lindbergh, and this is his thing. This is what he's looking at, is trying to develop better models for how cliffs evolve. And so what he's done is he's actually built this model that includes tidal range change, waves coming in, a beach that buffers the wave attack at the base of the cliff, and a cliff that actually has rock properties, rock hardness properties. And that's, to be fair, that's about the best we can do right now. Cliffs are obviously a lot more complex than that. There's a lot of stuff going on in any individual piece of rock. But what he's doing is it's actually working pretty well as long as you look at the results over reasonable time scales and reasonable spatial scales. And that means that you're looking at decades to centuries, really, for how these cliffs evolve. And what he's doing is he's using this model and calibrating it with things like that historical record of cliff movement that I talked about in the beginning, where they can look at a 70-year record of how the cliffs have moved over that time. So that's an ongoing effort in our lab. And then we've had a postdoc who's now gone on to Chicago who did a similar thing with the actual beach movement. And this was for the first phase of the modeling effort down in Southern California. And he built a conceptually similar model, but it included sand transport both along shore, cross shore, with wave events, with tidal cycles, and he ran it for about 100 years, and he calibrated it with the historical data on shoreline position, and he produced these maps for all of Southern California that showed where the beach line started from, where it ended up, which was the yellow line, and then the red line is where that evolved position would be, but with the maximum seasonal cycle, because the beach position does move seasonally. So it's another area that is, I think, a little easier to get a handle on because it's not episodic like cliffs, but this is something else we can do. And the interesting thing here is that, we'll get into this in a minute when I talk about the flooding models, but this black line here is the hard structure limit on the beach, which is digitized off aerial photos. And as you guys all know, beaches will erode up until they hit something hard, like Highway 1, like was just mentioned, that protects all the inland things. And at that point, your model doesn't work very well anymore, because you don't just have sand moving around. So we're actually working on trying to figure out how you do that. Once you run out of sand, is you have a whole new model you have to develop, which is some hybrid of a cliff model and a beach model. All right, with that, we'll go on to the actual flooding modeling work. And this has been a huge effort in our lab. There are flooding models around that look at sea level rise, but what's been out there has been what's called a bathtub model. You know, you fill it with water, you look at the ring around the perimeter, and that's the extent of how high it goes. What actually happens in real life is the tides go up and down, the wind blows, storms come in, you have El Niños come in, and you get sea level rise because the water's warmer or cooler. And then you have sea level rise on top of that that's pushing the whole thing up. So what they've done is they've built a dynamic physical model that actually includes all those parameters. And these are the kinds of things that you get, is the order of magnitude of the changes you get when you do the bathtub model. So you get sea level rise on the order of 1 meter they're talking about in the next 100 years. A lot of debate there, but just use that for a number. A couple meters for the tide range going up and down. So if you put those two together, you can create a contour of where that water's going to go, just like the FEMA flood maps. But if you put the physics in and add waves in, you get some other numbers in here that are pretty significant. Storm surge, that's what happens when the wind's blowing and it's stormy and it's pushing all this water up on the beach. Wave set up and run up. You know, you get a big set, you get infragravity going, all of a sudden you get a big push of water up the beach. And that happens episodically. It's not happening all the time, but that will push water up and over things and into areas where you didn't expect to find it. So what we've done is we've taken these models and run them with a whole suite of different storm scenarios for usually about 100 years to capture all the range of variability in the system, and then generated maps that you can go to. There's a website for this, but I'll show you in a sec. And you can look at what the extent of the flooding would be for different scenarios. So you can kind of run your own experiment. This is the area that was covered here. We're right down here in the bottom, Half Moon Bay. This was the patch I was telling you about that was run in the second phase of this project. Go back one. We'll start with Pacifica. That's a pretty good poster child for flooding. This is actually already has up here 125 centimeters of sea level rise in it. And that's what's causing this little bit of bulging in here along the edge. So you can put these things in independently. You can put sea level rise and storms in independently. And if you add the 100-year storm into that, that's when you get all that. So if you're a manager, it's good to know that. You know, things get hairy, this is what you want to try to protect. Okay, we can come down to Half Moon Bay here.
Yeah.
So I put the whole, this one's a little zoomed out because I wanted the whole stretch of the extent that they covered, because this is where they stopped, was right here. These little dots that are hard to see are the most landward extent of wave run-up. And then the blue is going to be the actual flooding. So when you add this one doesn't have anything in it, no sea level rise, no storms. And then that's where we are right now. It'll come really, there we go. Not much happening there. It's because you have all these bluffs. You can raise sea level, but all it does is slosh up against the bluffs. You're not seeing a lot move in. There's a little bit in here, but not a whole ton. It's mostly up in here, which if we zoom in on the next one. Here's it. Technology. Okay, so that's the zoom in of the bay. So that's what happens with 1¼ meters of sea level rise in a 100-year storm. So in this area, these are the areas you're going to see flooding. Unsurprisingly, if you know the area, I mean, these are low-lying areas. But if you just did the bathtub model with that 1¼ meters of sea level rise, which you wouldn't see nearly this much. So like I said, you can go to the website, you can play with this all day. You can look at all of Southern California, you can look at this area, and right now they're working on the area between here and down where I am in Santa Cruz. Okay. All right, so let's get out of what we're doing and go back to what the future holds and what the context of all this is going to be. You know, why we're doing this, where we're going, what do we need to be preparing for? This is the latest sea level rise data, and it's reasonably compelling, I think. You know, back in 1900, it's pretty flat, 0.6 millimeters per year, accelerating in here, and then picking up in here after about 1980 to about 3 millimeters per year. You know, that's a pretty impressive graph. I will say, just to be fair, that that's about this much. It's about 20 centimeters right there. So that's about how much total change there is in there. But it's happening, okay? I mean, that's just the data. It's also worth pointing out here that all this early data are from tide gauges, which are along the edges of coastlines. And this later stuff is from satellites, which can look at the whole ocean. So there's a little difference there in the methods, but they're kind of lined up pretty well. And the satellite stuff is neat because it tells you something else. Sea level rise is not happening the same everywhere. And this has been brought up. It's been in the news to some degree. But you know, that 3 millimeters per year that we just saw is somewhere down here in this orange band. So if you take all of that ocean and put it all together, you get an average of about 3, but there's a huge range there. And in particular, you're all looking, I'm sure, right where we are, on the coast of California. Right in there, there's pretty much nothing going on, which has been in the news. There's a lot of the deniers been saying, well, look, sea level's not rising. Well, yeah, you look at the whole thing, that's true. Right here, it's not. This also goes up to 2012. That's a 20-year from 1990 to 2012. And there are good reasons for why that's happened. And that's easing off. So we're actually going to start catching up here along the coast of California. Okay, locally, what's happening in sea level rise? You don't really care about the whole globe. This is San Francisco and La Jolla. This is from a recent paper in Shore and Beach by a guy who's been doing this kind of stuff forever. And what he's showing here is the San Francisco one is going to be the most interesting to you, is we are pretty much on that about 3 millimeter per year curve. And what's interesting is you can even see the flat period in these, which he's highlighted in the bottom here. And he's picked like the 1980 to 200. The one that was discussed before was shifted about 10 years later. And you can shift this over and you see the same kind of thing. If you only pick that chunk of data, it would look pretty flat. You know, there's not a lot of trend in that, because these things happen over longer time scales, and there are all these other natural things happening on these shorter time scales that are kind of confounding the data unless you look at it over this. You know, this is what, 1840 to 2020, so we've got 180 years in there. Okay, storms. Sea level's coming up, but we also have storms on top of that, and storms do most of the damage. Storms are pretty interesting. This is a paper on the left side. This left axis here is wave height versus time. This is from 1978 to 2000, and the paper was published in 2006. I think these data go up to about 2003. And these are from the offshore buoys, which haven't been out there for that long, so we don't have a ton of data on these, and these are a little shorter. They started later. Here's Half Moon Bay. That curve is pretty flat. We're not seeing, in that particular data set, a big increase in height over time. You go further up the coast, Oregon, Washington, that's a pretty statistically significant slope. They're seeing bigger and bigger waves every year. So they're going to have to prepare for this increase in wave energy hitting the coastline. This is another study that looked at the frequency of just North Pacific storms. There are more storms out there. This is our new reality, okay? I don't think here in Half Moon Bay we're going to see a big increase in wave height, or in California in general, but certainly there are areas up in the Pacific Northwest that should be preparing for more wave and storm damage. I'd love to see those data extended out to the 2015 data, by the way. El Ninos. We all expect a lot of damage to come with El Ninos. This one was a little of a disappointment for a lot of people I talked to because we didn't have the rain. They were all expecting flooding, and I work on the coast. And I said, well, it showed up here. It definitely showed up where you guys live along the coast. This is the classic El Nino here, with all the warm temperatures heading into the coast of South America. There is, to date, no real historical evidence for a change in the frequency of El Ninos. They're not very well behaved, so it's a little hard to detect that. There is a possibility of a change in the types to what they call a Central Pacific El Nino, where the warm water pool is pushed more out in the Central Pacific. And that will have ramifications for the types of storms that are generated and what we're going to be preparing for, if that holds into the future. Okay, our El Nino this winter. Did you guys enjoy the El Nino?
No.
I'm sure Bob did. I love this picture. This is Ventura Pier. It's got the flag up in the corner. If any of you guys know Ventura Pier, there's a bend in it. So there's a bend out behind it that goes around so that it's not on a ship or something, it's out there. But that's a great, great photo that was online. This El Nino delivered on the wave energy front. At all of our sites that we study at, all the buoys we look at, we have wave energy 50% above normal. That's a big deal. Water levels were up due to the El Nino. It actually just raises water level due to the warmer water. And when you look at the indices, which I'll show you here in a second, it looks like this El Nino was one of the top 3 in our historical record. So here we are. By this measure, we're number 1. This index is basically ocean temperature, which is a pretty simplistic technique, and the scientists actually prefer this next one. So full disclosure, we're not going to be number 1. This one is the multivariate El Nino index. It includes temperature, sea level pressure, cloudiness, a whole bunch of things that give you a better indication of what's going on. And we only have data for that back to here. This reconstructed version is what people built just using temperature and pressure data, which we have back that far. But you can see it actually matches pretty well with the green line in there. So this is probably pretty good, but even by that standard, we're about number 3 over here. Definitely under, this is 82, 83, and 97, 98, which some of you may remember. I was surfing in the 82, 83 El Nino. But it was definitely impressive. And for our stuff, too fast.
Those pictures.
Yeah, we got to look at the pictures. All right, we'll see if this will go. This is a bunch of photos from sites around our study sites and some other ones.
I think you've got that on time. Just
Dan.
Okay. All right, we'll wait.
Nope.
Tell me when I can hit the button.
Dan.
Yeah?
Is that-
Okay. All right, we're almost done. Okay, that's Ventura Point, which has a known erosion problem. This is Goleta Beach. Bob's going to show a slide of this later. It doesn't look at all like that. This is Isla Vista in Santa Barbara. This is our area down Moss Landing. These dunes got completely eaten away. This is Santa Cruz. This is Steamer Lane, Santa Cruz. Pretty good day. This is our buggy down at the stormwater outfall below Fort Funston. That's usually under the sand. And that's Stinson Beach. There's a scarp that the kid's trying to climb. Okay. So we had quite a winter. And here's the data. So these are the time series of shoreline change. So I was showing how those lines move back and forth across the plot there. They go up and down in the summer, winter. And this, where they tank at the end, that's this winter. And these bars show what the erosion was this winter compared to the long-term average. And at all of our sites, it was well above average. It averaged almost 80% over average. And you can see back here the other El Ninos don't really look that spectacular. There's some reasons for that, but certainly this winter does rate up there. Last slide. So what's coming for where you live? Sea level rise, we talked about. It's going to be coming. You know, it doesn't look that spectacular. 28 centimeters in 2050, 92 in 2100. Those numbers aren't absolute, but that's kind of a rough guess. The storm's probably not going to change a lot. El Niños, we think we're going to see more of them, so we're going to see more of these events where we have doubling of erosion a given winter, which, by the way, makes it a lot harder for the beach to recover the following summer. So those effects can persist. But the net effect is really what's striking, is that what we call a 100-year coastal water level, the highest water level you see in 100 years, is probably going to occur every 1 to 5 years in the future. So our new reality is going to be what once was an extremely rare event is going to be pretty normal, as somebody mentioned. Extreme events are going to be the new norm. So with that, I'll turn it over to James.
Thank you. So if you have questions for the speakers, there's some cards. Please write them down and turn them in, and then we'll pick as many as we think we can get to. I'm going to introduce James Zulas. James is a coastal engineer at the San Francisco district of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, where he has been involved in developing solutions to coastal erosion and navigation problems in the San Francisco region. James received a BA in geography at UC Berkeley and then received his training in coastal geomorphology at UCLA, where his PhD dissertation addressed long-term beach changes in Orange County. James was the primary author of the Coastal Regional Sediment Management Plan for Santa Cruz Littoral Cell, which includes San Mateo County from Pillar Point southward. James served as the primary coastal engineer on the North Half Moon Bay Shoreline Improvement Project, where he collaborated with a team from the USACE Engineer Research and Development Center to model the effectiveness of several erosion mitigation measures. James also conducted an evaluation of bluff erosion in the project area in order to better understand the influence of the East Breakwater on bluff retreat. I don't know about you, but I'm very interested in this talk. So James?
I'll do it and stand over here. So I guess, and then who's advancing the slides?
I will have to do it.
All right.
Hold on a second. You seem to be having technical problems.
Okay, well, I'll just introduce myself again. So everyone's probably familiar with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the coastal structures we have here. They're basically constructed so that you could have a fully operating harbor there, but as with anything in life, there are trade-offs, and as you know, some of you are well aware that when you build something in a natural environment, there can be impacts, and that's what this most recent iteration of the study here was designed to look at. And as soon as we're ready to go, I guess we can go for it. Oh yeah, so
The speaker's right up here.
Yeah, so just keep the mic pointed away from that speaker.
Gotcha. Sorry. This better? All right. Sorry. Don't use the microphone too often, obviously. Have me chained to the computer doing modeling. So, in any case, today's talk's really going to focus on kind of what we'd call sort of a coastal engineering analysis that would go into a study. And basically, I'm really going to kind of go at it from the technical side. I'm going to have a few slides that deal with the policy and money, which I'm generally not involved in. We're fortunate enough to have the chief of planning from my office here, Tom, who I think is Tom Kendall, and we might bring him into the discussion if we want to get into those issues, policy and money and that sort of thing. But I'm going to start off on the technical side at least. And basically, the problem, as you know, is that the breakwaters have definitely played a role in accelerating some of the erosion here, particularly at Surfers Beach. And we were trying to see if there are any ways we could come up with some design measures that could mitigate this erosion potentially, without compromising operations at the harbor. And the primary way we did this was through numerical modeling, and I'm going to just run through some of the results and the conclusions here. And the next slide will prompt me. So this is kind of the slide for the planning and policy people, but kind of overall where we're at with the study. we're here in the feasibility phase, which basically means this is where we're deciding if it's feasible to make a federal investment. And sorry? Oh. And I was making sure this is what I thought it said up there. But basically, we're in the feasibility phase still. I know that it has been drawn out, and that's coming to a close. And at the close of the feasibility phase, we have what's called a detailed project report, which is basically going to state whether or not there's a federal interest in the investment. And moving on to the next slide, I'm just going to hit you with the bottom line up front. Unfortunately, in our detailed project report, we're probably going to say that the benefits just aren't there to justify the investment. And this is the point where I'm sure everyone gets disappointed. And we're disappointed too. The primary reason has to do with economics and just showing that there's enough economics related to recreation at the beach to support the project. Ideally, if we could have shown that putting a protective beach there would prevent Caltrans from having to make improvements to protect Highway 1, then the economics would have been easier. But unfortunately, the planning assumption has been that Caltrans will continue to do what they can to maintain the highway absent action on the Corps of Engineers' part. So that's the policy as far as I understand it. I'm going to look at Tom and make sure I'm not totally getting this wrong. So this is the part where everyone grows eggs and but that's just the reality of it. And but give everyone a few seconds to process.
Are you going to give us the data? Are you going to give us the cost? Are you going to give us the cost-benefit analysis?
Yes, and that was the other thing I was
You might want to leave with that.
going to update on too. So in terms of the actual data, which is going to come out, we're anticipating releasing the report, which includes the all-important economics section in the next couple weeks. It will be released on the Corps of Engineers website, and I probably should have put a link up there, but we can write it up on the board to make sure everyone gets it later, because I know that's very important. There's a lot of vetting that has to go through our public affairs and all that sort of thing, but it's important that it gets out to the public, and we obviously understand that. But
For the audience, that report will go on midcoastcommunitycouncil.org website.
yeah, and we're gonna work with whoever wants to post it wherever they can, through the Harbor District, to everybody, but that's the unfortunate reality we're in right now. But a little bit of a silver lining is that there was some, we did do some pretty good technical work on how we might design beach fill at the beach and other solutions. We've done some economic work too. I meant environmental work too, in terms of if someone had to pull permits to do the necessary environmental permits to do what we need to do for a project. A lot of that background work has been done, so future efforts can really lean on the reports and the technical information that's in there. And one possible avenue is through the Coastal Sediment Management Work Group, which is CSMW, and I'll have a few slides about that at the end. But what we found in preparing this study has gone into the Coastal Sediment Management Work Group, their Regional Sediment Management Plan, which I think, as was mentioned in the introduction, we're basically looking at, it covers the coast from Pillow Point all the way down to Moss Landing in Santa Cruz. And that has a lot of information and recommendations for what we could do here. And the San Mateo County Harbor District, under their own volition, they're working with the contractor to try to secure some grants to do a pilot beach nourishment project. And that pilot project, again, is leaning heavily on the technical findings from this report, some of which you're going to see in a few minutes. So I would say that while the federal money might not be there right now, there's some momentum, I think, to get something done here. I mean, it's tough, but that's the reality of it. And just want to level with y'all. And but that was now, does anyone want to see pictures and see what's going on? These slides here are probably not necessary for this group, since everyone here is very familiar with the situation here, but I mean, it is useful to note that in the 1950s, prior to when the harbor was constructed here, you did have a very natural, we call kind of a log spiral crescent-shaped beach, you know. So the bay was in some sort of equilibrium with its environment. But of course, as the structures went in, there was some disruption to the nearshore currents, the wave patterns, and those sort of things. And I think Bob will probably have some good graphics showing that too. So I don't want to cut into his talk too much, but the upshot is that, you know, a lot of sand that potentially would have been kind of swashing around in front of where Surfers Beach is now, no longer is able to do that because the structures are there. It's no longer, the sediment transport's been disrupted, in other words. And that's kind of the main point of this. And as a study, we're really focused on the area closest to the East Breakwater. And we're also focused on if there are any, you know, the shoaling issues within the harbor too, as a nexus. So moving on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I like to show these slides. This actually shows it under construction in the late 1950s. And you can see, even as they're immediately starting construction, there's already a revetment going up right here. So it wasn't necessarily a very wide beach. It was probably a fairly narrow beach that had a bluff, which was naturally allowed to erode a bit and feed the beach. And but as you can see, as the Corps, Caltrans, and others have done, basically the shoreline's been fixed in place with revetments, and that's kind of the reality we're dealing with now. Development happened behind these revetments. And as you can see in the other picture there, you get an idea, as you all know, that where the bluff edge was in 1956, it's not there today. So, and moving on to the next slide. And this just kind of illustrates some of the issues everyone's familiar with. This has been going on for a while. It's been on the radar of the Corps of Engineers for a long time too, because the structure that was constructed by the Corps is involved in it. But again, it's, you know, it's just been tough from a kind of policy and money standpoint really to fix the problem. And that shows, this is probably, what is it, from 1956, yeah, kind of before this area was more developed too. So moving on to the next slide. And so this is kind of getting into the more recent technical analysis that we did, because, you know, there have been a lot of, you know, anecdotal evidence that yes, the erosion is much worse by the breakwater. So we went out, and one of the first things we did is we took a series of historic air photos, did an overlay, and really tried to see how much the bluff was eroding. And we compared it to other sections of bluff that weren't as close to the breakwater as kind of natural control groups, if you will. And you know, it's pretty unequivocal that the erosion along Surfers Beach, I mean, the bluff there is much higher, much higher than surrounding areas that have a similar environment, similar geology. So, you know, it's very fair to say that the presence of the East Breakwater and the harbor facilities there, you know, really have been contributing to what we're seeing there. And that's why it was justified for us to do this study. And we've already been through some of these points. The other one that's interesting is all the sand that's in the harbor, and I understand that as part of the pilot project, that's really being looked at as an opportunity, hopefully. So, and it's also interesting to note that, you know, there's a little bit of a, you know, kind of debate about how sand gets into the harbor. You know, is it coming just through the entrance? Is it getting pushed through the structure by waves? I tend to believe the latter. Haven't been out there on inspections, but it's kind of an interesting area to observe. Next slide, please. And what this shows is, first of all, it shows this area where the depth is less than 10 feet. So we consider it kind of an area of shoaling in red. And pretty much all that is sand that would be fairly suitable for placement at Surfers Beach. And the number that, you know, we did some computations, you're looking at 250,000 to 300,000 cubic yards. So it's not a small amount of sand. I mean, at Ocean Beach, the recent efforts they've done where they've backpassed sand from the north end of the beach and then trucked it down the Great Highway, that was about, I think, 60 or 70,000 cubic yards. If anyone in the audience wants to correct me, but this is, you know, it's a bigger number than that. You know, it's a fair amount of sand. And if we move on to the next slide, this kind of gets into some of the design measures we looked at. We tried to pencil them out so that we could, you know, come up with some numbers, come up with some approximate costs for what it would take to do this. And then that would be fed into the economic analysis. And we looked at two kind of scenarios for placing sand on the beach. These were driven by the fact that there's some sand that's kind of underwater most of the time and has not been vegetated. That's about 150,000 cubic yards. That you could get with dredging methods maybe. Probably from an environmental standpoint, it would be easier to get that sand as opposed to the sand that has formed that fillet beach that everyone saw in the previous photo. And that's been vegetated now. And not being an environmental expert myself, I know there's some consternation that if you were to remove sand from that area where there's vegetation, that there could be additional environmental issues. So we wanted to look at what if you just took the stuff that's easy to get in the harbor, and what if you took everything that got impounded in the harbor since construction. And that's where you got the two numbers for quantities for beach fill and what we could do. Some of the other measures we looked at involved modifying the breakwater. And we had gotten a lot of feedback from the public and anecdotal evidence saying, well, maybe if you put a hole in the breakwater here, the sand would escape. Maybe if you sealed the breakwater, sand wouldn't get in. And, realistically, these are probably fairly expensive and controversial to implement because anytime you do modify a structure, you could introduce a change in the environment within the harbor. You could have waves getting in. But we felt like we should do our diligence and look at these measures too. Some of the other ones we talked about is also kind of a spur breakwater, and there are other ideas of putting other sort of little groins or other smaller rock structures to kind of hold sand in place on the beach. I don't know if Bob's going to talk about that, but I know that conceptually that's an idea too. And we did also look at managed retreat a little bit just to get an idea of a really rough ballpark cost. I mean, it's something that's going to be much more expensive than just placing sand, but looking at that and the balance of things too. And we ended up modeling 4, and the model we used is it's called the Coastal Modeling System, and it has basically models water levels from tides and other factors and waves on top of it, and then it's coupled with a sediment transport model. And I know that it's probably a fairly similar idea to the Cosmos model, although we're not really downscaling from a global climate model. We're not running climate change. We're looking at scenarios with typical wave conditions over the course of a year and saying, well, if we put the sand here and leave it there for a year of typical wave conditions, what happens? If we put a hole in the breakwater and let it run for a year, what happens? So it's a little bit different than looking at broader climate change, but it gives you an idea. And the other two we looked at were looking at modifying these breakwaters I mentioned before, where you put an opening in there and also where you would seal it. And I think the next slide will probably show the model domains. So again, we're not doing a big model up and down the coast. This is really focused on the local area, and really tried to resolve the local bathymetry pretty well, because I'm sure, as a lot of folks know, it plays a very big role in how waves break and how currents get set up all along the coast here. So we tried to do our best to get a pretty high fidelity model of the area. And next slide, please. And I'm going to go through these ones pretty quick because they're a little hard to make out. But basically, we wanted to see what would happen under existing conditions for a year if you ran the model. And they're really hard to make out, but these little kind of red areas you see at Surfers Beach, that just shows erosion. If you had blue areas, that would show shoaling or accretion, sand building up. So we'll just go to the next one. And kind of what this shows, just to give you an idea, is if we were to place 250,000 cubic yards of sand, and you brought a beach up, the elevation of the beach would be several feet above mean high water, so pretty high. The basic idea here is that you could get a fairly decent sized beach there. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think it was over 100 feet wide. And you could place sand all the way down to where the revetment that protects Marauder Road starts. Now, some people are going to ask why we didn't look at placing sand in front of the revetment. One of the main ideas was that a lot of the sand, the typical kind of drift, littoral drift, or currents would tend to bring it down this direction. So the idea was that up here would be more of a feeder beach for the down coast area. And the other concern was that generally when you place sand in front of revetments. I mean, it does have a tendency to can scour out too, and there are other issues with that. But that's what we looked at initially, just to get an idea. And the next slide, and this shows, yes, if we do the big beach fill. And kind of the interesting pattern to note here is that, so on the, we place the sand, there's kind of the dry part of the beach where you would walk. That erodes pretty fast. But you see these blue areas that pop up. The sand is popping up in offshore bars, you know, several hundred feet offshore. So the good news is it's staying pretty close to shore. It's not washing out completely into deep water generally. Because if you have the sand in those water depths of about 5 to 10 feet, I mean, that's within where the wave currents can really pick it up. And depending on the season and other factors, could move it on shore perhaps from there. But it does kind of represent maybe a temporary storage of the sand. And if anything, it could reduce the wave energy hitting the shore immediately too, by kind of, for lack of a better word, kind of just tripping up the waves before they get to the coast, instead of them coming out of deep water and surging up onto the revetment. So, but, you know, that's the idea with beach nourishment in a lot of places. And the next slide, please. Here we looked at a smaller quantity. We looked at 150,000 cubic yards. The beach would not be quite as wide. And this is the idea that you take what you could immediately get just inside the breakwater without going after the recreationally used and vegetated part of the beach there. And again, we saw a similar pattern with this. We move on to the next slide, where you know you do see this immediate erosion, pretty immediate, of the dry beach. So a lot of times people will see that and think, oh, it didn't work, it just eroded. But as long as it stays within, you know, what we would call the depth of closure, but you know, even closer within the surf zone, like within 10 feet or so depth of water, I mean, it could give you a lot of benefits in terms of reducing wave energy getting to the shore. And the next slide is going to show the other concept we looked at. This is where we told the model to make the breakwater impervious there, basically, and said, see what happens. Because previously it was set to let some sand through, which reflected what we thought the reality on the ground was. And you know, the results here were fairly mixed. I mean, the shoaling within the harbor actually decreased. You didn't see as much sand getting into the harbor, so that kind of validated, you know, what we thought we were observing out there in the field. But at the same time, it didn't really seem to have an effect on the nearby beach. So the sand that wasn't getting into the harbor wasn't necessarily making it to Surfers Beach either, at least in this model run. So that was the scenario we looked at here, and I think the next slide just shows the results, which are kind of hard to see. It shows kind of a mixed bag, but it doesn't really show any of the accretion and beach building that we were hoping for at the beach there when we ran it. And then the next slide, I think, will be the last one. This is where, if everyone sees, we put we're calling a notch in the breakwater. About, I think it was approximately 150 feet or so. And we were working at metric in this model. I don't remember the exact number, but you know, we tried to put a sizable hole in there with the idea that, you know, if there were strong enough currents inside the harbor, that perhaps they could mobilize some of the sand and push it out to the beach. But unfortunately, that's not really what happened. If we move on to the next slide, if anything, a little bit more sand got into the harbor through there. And this actually is not, we weren't too surprised by this because the tidal currents in this area are very, very weak. And we looked at the tidal currents there. This sort of solution works much better if you have, like say, a groin. Does everyone know what that is? It's basically kind of like this, but it's to hold the beach in place. And if you have a coast where the sand's moving in one direction down the coast pretty constantly and you have groins, what you'll see is the upside of the groin, the beach will fill in, the downside there'll be erosion. And groins, you can notch them. This is a very common technique, and then the sand will come through. But here, there's just not enough current pushing that way. It's basically the simple way of putting it. And that's probably because the entire harbor itself, you know, has been impounded from the wave energy. And you know, what you have in there now is you have tidal currents coming through the mouth and back out. But the tidal currents are restricted through the mouth of the harbor, but they're spreading out over a much bigger area, right, throughout the harbor. So they're conserving energy and that sort of thing. They just don't have the juice to push the sand out. So we were disappointed to see that because that would have been a nice, elegant solution. Next slide, please. And this is where we have a lot of text where we get into some numbers, but I guess kind of the upshot here is that you're looking at a time scale of 5 to 10 years. If you place the sand, that it'll kind of disappear from view for a lot of people. But you're looking at a time scale, you know, on the decades, maybe 20 or 30 or 40 years, where that sand is not necessarily gone. It's sitting just offshore in 5 or 10 feet of water and should be providing benefits in terms of reducing wave energy getting to the shoreline, hopefully. And should also be kind of a storage area for when you have the right conditions that the waves can bring the sand back to shore too, under certain conditions. And that's kind of what this text is saying in so many words. You know, and we didn't really look at strong El Nino conditions, but as everyone would guess, I mean, our assumption would be that there would be more erosion too. So, I mean, the thing is, you could put the investment in, move a couple 100,000 cubic yards, and you could have a series of very mild winters and get lucky and have a nice beach for a while, or you could get unlucky. You could place the sand. That winter, you get one of those great 100-year water levels that Dan was talking about, and you know, with some big waves, you get really unlucky, and a lot of that sand, hopefully some of it will remain in the offshore bars and come back, but some of it might really get washed out to deeper water, because as the waves get bigger and bigger under those conditions, they essentially feel bottom further out, and the depth at which you can get sediment transport gets further out too. So you can get unlucky too. So it is kind of a chance game there too. And let's see, I think I have several more slides. I don't want to take up too much more time. This is kind of the key points of the results. If you seal the breakwater, you could reduce shoaling in the harbor, and that would be good because it is starting to become a problem from what I understand. But until we can really show economically that shoaling in the harbor is making it dangerous and impossible to get in and out, and we can attach some dollars to it, it's pretty hard to justify using that as a reason for moving the sand. Because if you did that, if you had that justification, you'd have to take the sand somewhere, and the beach would be a logical place. The other thing is that, you know, like I already talked about the notch, but it's there to read again. You know, unfortunately, the elegant solution that works with groin fields on certain coasts probably won't work here. And I think we got one more slide of conclusions. And basically, what will probably work best if your goal is to reduce the waves hitting the toe of the bluff and inducing erosion there is putting a beach in front of it. Once you put the beach in front of it, there are ways to keep the beach there too. We didn't really get too in depth with that because we already knew that the cost of putting the beach would probably be pretty hard to justify from a federal standpoint. But, you know, depending on what sort of funding was available, and I think Bob's going to go over some ideas too, is that once you put the sand there are ways of keeping it there too with structures. And I got 2 more slides kind of talking about next steps. Again, I want to plug the Coastal Sediment Management Work Group. I mean, they really are trying to get everyone involved in maintaining their beaches along the coast. We have the Regional Sediment Management Plan. That's online. It's available. I think the next slide has the website for that. And, oh yeah, but this is recently released. And the other thing, again, I'm going to just say, I've been told by those who are in charge of this sort of thing that the report should be up on the core website within a couple of weeks, and we can make sure that the public link is available. And I think we have one more slide here. Yes, the plug for the Coastal Sediment Management Work Group, and encourage everyone to check that out because that's kind of a good starting point if you're concerned about managing sand on the coast. They have links to lots of resources, great web mapping tools. I mean, we could do a whole other presentation about CSMW and the work they do too, but again, I don't want to take up too much more time, and I don't know, I guess we'll turn it over to the next speaker, and again, we're just sorry that it couldn't work out from the federal perspective thus far, but we'll keep trying.
Thank you very much. So I have a couple words. First of all the surfers in the room, I'm sure when you were hearing about sand making a giant beach and then that sand being deposited as what surfers call sandbars, we're thinking not a bad idea. So the MCC will post the slides and also any of the links that we've talked about, so go to the MCC website for those. So before I get to the next speaker, do you all need a 10-minute break? No. No? Okay, great. So our next speaker is Robert Battaglia. What he doesn't have in this story about his background is that he's been a strong advocate for Surfrider Foundation over the years. We've had our ups and downs, but he's always been a supporter in spite of a few disagreements here and there over the years. And he's been a real water person since I've known him. He's been an advocate for coastal protection all the years that I've known him, and I'm really happy to have him here. Bob is Vice President and Chief Engineer and leader of ESA's Environmental Hydrology, Coastal Zone Engineering and Management Team. Now I will. They need to know. He has dedicated his career of 25 years to coastal and estuarine engineering, wetland and creek restoration design, and waterfront civil engineering projects throughout the U.S. He has addressed erosion and flooding hazards in the West Coast, including shoreline mapping, sand budget, wave and run-up studies, design of hard and soft erosion protection, and designs of shoreline retreat and realignment. He was integral to pioneering projects such as the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission's 1990 San Francisco Bay sea level rise study, effects of coastal sand mining in southern Monterey Bay, FEMA's 2005 Pacific Coast Flood Hazard Mapping Guidelines, and coastal erosion response to sea level rise for the Pacific Institute and the California Ocean Protection Council in 2009. Bob holds a Master's of Engineering in Civil and Coastal Engineering from UC Berkeley. He's a member of the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission's Engineering Criteria Review Board, Northern California Vice President of the California Shore and Beach Preservation Association, member of the Surfrider Foundation, and former president of the California Marine Parks and Harbor Association.
Sorry to make you all listen to that. So thanks for hanging in here. I'm going to try to go quickly. They asked me to talk about solutions. I'm an engineer. Am I supposed to switch the slides? Or?
No, I'll do it. Just
could you go to the next one? So this is me. Ed went over a lot of it. But my favorite accolade is I was inducted to the Double Overhead Association at Y Surfboards and Y Surf Shop in the late 1980s. That was pretty maverick. So got my picture on the wall, and that was my high point. Those waves are now small. But I'm going to talk about solutions, but I don't really know exactly what the solution is for Marauder Road and Surfers Beach. I have some ideas. I'm going to talk more generally. I think really the problem isn't necessarily a technical one. It's more of an institutional one, and it's very complicated. There's lots of different organizations, and I think that you all are probably going to need to embark on a community-based discussion about a range of scenarios and come to some agreement as to what you want to do. And I think you need help with somebody to lead that, and hopefully it'll be the county or someone. So I'm going to talk about solutions, but I don't actually know what the right thing for you all to do is. So hopefully I'll cover all of them and give you some ideas. But first I want to talk a little bit about what I understand the problem to be at Surfers Beach and Marauder Road. All my slides aren't this hard to read. But at Pillar Point Harbor, the first point here is it traps the sand that would otherwise be moving down the coast. There's 3 creeks, drainages that go into Pillar Point Harbor and within the outer breakwater. Secondly, the breakwater, the southern breakwater causes, or the jetty as people call it, causes waves to reflect and move sand to the south. So those are the 2 problems that we have. Now, shore armoring on the Coast Highway and Marauder Road protect the backshore, but it doesn't protect the beach. And the wave reflection off of that armoring will progressively lower the beach and increase the sand transport. Now, climate change is something that we're faced with. I don't think we've really seen it yet, but we will, from what I understand, and that'll make everything worse, except maybe it'll be a little deeper in the harbor, so maybe navigation will be easier. So the result is that because of the sand discharging from the drainages into the harbor and being trapped there, you'll have more shoaling. We'll continue to have an erosion hotspot in this vicinity and north. The wave reflection from the breakwater, I'll get into this. I think it improves surfing locally. It causes an interference pattern, which contributes to the surfing at the jetty. But wave reflection from the shore armoring degrades the surf, and that'll probably become more apparent if it's not already. Over time, we'll have reduced beach width and surf access, and there will be a safety issue if there isn't one already. And with sea level rise, you'll start to see more wave overtopping, unless we do one of these, take one of many adaptation approaches. Next slide, please. So littoral shore processes. I'm going to talk about setting a little bit, and so why do we have Half Moon Bay? Why is it shaped the way it is? And how does that frame the problem and the solutions? It's a hook-shaped bay between the headlands of Pillar Point and Miramontes Point, roughly. And it's formed by waves that refract and diffract. They change angle and they focus in certain places. And so we've got this hook-shaped bay. It's called a logarithmic spiral shoreline. You can read about it in Bascom's Waves and Beaches, which is a great book to pick up and read if you want to look at this stuff. So typically the sediment comes from the streams, and there's some sediment that comes down the coast from Moss Landing down this way from the north. Moss Beach down this way from the north. But mostly you have sand coming into the hook-shaped bay, and then the waves just sort that out, and then it tends to leak out the south side of the bay and continue south. That's my perception of it. So pre-harbor, the sand would come out and the waves would move the sand around, and we didn't really have that great of an erosion situation. I also want to point out that waves and sand can move through the breakwaters. I'm glad James mentioned that. And then sand deposits in sheltered areas. So basically the harbor is a big sand trap. Any sand that gets near there, it just tends to stay there. Next slide. So here's the harbor. You've seen that. Next slide. This is something that I got from SFEI. They do a lot of historic ecology and historic maps. You can learn a lot from looking at history. And this is the marsh here. There's a drainage coming out here, another one here, and then Deer Creek coming out here. Those supply sand to the coast. Next slide. This is a picture. I think this is the outlet to the Deer Creek. So Deer Creek comes down, it goes into a culvert right about here, and I think it goes by the parking lot, and when it really flows hard, I think it comes out of the drain inlets and across anyway, it deposits sand on the boat launch ramp and basically just causes a big mess. Next slide. So this is just a picture that I found that you can see some of the sand deposits. A lot of the sand has moved this way. There's a lot of sand in here these days. This is the sand that would have been spread around by waves if the breakwater wasn't here, and then the sand would have moved down the coast. Next slide. So this is, if you could just hit so this is showing waves. These are waves moving in and showing how the wave crest would change orientation and shape due to this refraction and diffraction process. I just drew this in by hand, but it's about right. And if you could go back, please. So this is what we call a wave ray. Here's another one. So the energy of the waves coming in is proportional to the distance, and then as this spreads, you get kind of a low energy area in here. Of course, there's also the Mavericks Reef and the reef that comes to the south. But the point is that if you look at this wave crest, it's kind of parallel to the shore, which is why the bay is shaped the way it is. And what that does is it results in a really low net transport rate. Sometimes the sand moves one way, sometimes it moves the other, but it's not always moving in one direction. It's kind of what we call an equilibrium planform. Next slide. And so going back to the problem, we've got these drainages that are bringing sand in that would have been moved by waves, even though they're not that large most of the time, but the sand would have moved through the system here. Then secondly, you have waves hitting this breakwater jetty and reflecting and increasing the transport this way. So this beach here has no sand supply and has increased transport away from the jetty, and that's why it's eroding. So it is caused by the breakwater and the harbor. Next slide. So then I want to talk a little bit about the surf. This is my impression. I don't usually surf at the jetty. I've been out there a couple times, so people might correct me. Actually, people might correct me about a lot of this stuff, but ask questions or jump in if you want. But at Surfers Beach, it's protected from the predominant northwest wind somewhat. Reduced swell exposure, as I had explained earlier. The reflection from the breakwater of the jetty causes a wave crossing, which increases the height of the wave locally, creates a little peak that surfers can get on and ride along. And then my impression is it's especially good on south and southwest swells when the waves really reflect off the breakwater. Next slide, I just found this picture where you can see some of the wave crests. And if you just cycle through it slowly, you can see the waves approaching. And maybe there's a few more waves approaching. And then you can see the reflected waves off the jetty. And you can see the interference pattern where these waves come together and forms a little peak. Now this is an older picture when there was a beach there. And then there's often peaks up and down and the interference pattern changes, but anyway, that's how I see the surfing setup. Next slide. So this is, I'm going to get into solutions and stuff. I just want to kind of give a little bit of background as I see the location. So these are graphics from James's Santa Cruz Regional Sediment Management Plan, and I didn't know it wasn't public, so hopefully it's okay if I show these. If not, we'll take them out. But what this shows is if the black box, the black lines show the erosion projected in the Pacific Institute study for the year 2050 with high sea level rise. And actually I worked on that study, so you can blame me for these lines. But the black line here, right at Surfers Beach, is pretty far in. It's on the other side of Highway 1. You can see there's a little jog here because we were mapping the whole state really fast, and it's approximate. Nobody had ever done this before, actually, when we did it. We came up with did the RNRD and came up with the methodology, so it still seems to work pretty well, even though we have better methods. And this is, I believe, the Murata Road area. It's hard to read this, but I think we underpredicted the erosion by 2050 in this location, but we were using historic erosion rates, which are probably limited by the armoring, and then we accelerated those based on sea level rise. So, next slide. So getting into strategies. This graphic is from the Coastal Commission's guidelines to look at sea level rise. And so adaptation to sea level rise and climate change has a couple of kind of concepts. You can accommodate, and that's, and this is a graphic from, this is a graphic from the city of San Francisco, forgot what they call it. Sea level rise action plan just came out. It's a pretty cool document. If you want to read it, you can get it online. And they use a similar terminology, but it's a little different. So you have accommodate, protect, retreat, and then you can see this little intersection hybrid. Most of the time we're in this hybrid zone, so this intersection could be a little bit bigger from my perspective. But the city of San Francisco, they've got accommodate, protect with engineered structures like a wall, protect with natural kind of green infrastructure like a marsh or something, and then retreat. So those are the basic categories that the people are talking about in terms of adaptation to sea level rise, and coastal erosion is right in there with sea level rises. There's kind of a similar coastal response. Next slide. So the overall idea is that if you could map risk, hold on a second, if you could map risk at the vertical axis and time or sea level change in the horizontal axis, the idea is that this red line is with time or the amount of sea level rise, there's going to be more and more people at risk, more property, more roads. And then Thanks. And so let's just say conceptually this is acceptable risk. So if we get above this line, we're not comfortable. And so next, so let's say we're right here. We're kind of uncomfortable. And then the idea of adaptation planning and scenario planning is to, next one, is to take action, reduce risk, figure you're going to have to take action again and just keep doing it to keep it within this conceptual community-based acceptable risk level. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk about some strategies. This is all still kind of new, so different people have different terminology. I'm using adaptation strategies from those prior references. Some people call them options. The Corps of Engineers, I think they call them measures. I kind of look at these as like little building blocks. So what we really do is probably a pile of building blocks. And you can put different piles of different building blocks together. You can armor this, place sand there, or whatever. So I'm going to talk about the building blocks and then the alternatives. So the building blocks are accommodation, as I mentioned before, and I'm going to focus on structural adaptation. Armoring, there's a couple different types of armoring. The seawall, rock revetment, a headland to confine sand, offshore breakwaters and reefs to hold sand, beach nourishment on the beach, and maybe a dune. There's a couple other, and then retreat. Next slide. So the alternatives from those measures that I'm going to talk about cover this armoring the road and the shore, bypassing the sand and beach nourishment. By bypassing, that's kind of a jargon-esque term. What that means is taking sand from the harbor where it's trapped and putting it on the beach. Reroute Deer Creek, this is a harebrained idea I had, so hopefully you can tolerate this and don't shoot me. I just, everyone, when you get into this, you're going to have to tolerate everyone's ideas and accept everything before you reject it. Shore structures to anchor the sand that you place to keep it from moving as quickly. Offshore breakwaters or reefs. Accommodation, I'll get into that again later. Rerouting Highway 1, manage retreat, and remove the harbor breakwaters. Oh, you like that? I actually am not going to talk about removing the harbor breakwaters. I just don't see it happening. But anyway. Okay, all right. Well, see, this is where you guys can make up your own solutions. But this is one of my, this is really almost a no-brainer to me, is to take the sand from the harbor and place it down here. It's not going to solve everything, but I think it will help. And there are some complications, but I really expect this to happen at some level within the next 5 years. I don't know if there's resistance to this, but I think it's done everywhere, and I think the Marine Sanctuary is ready to give it a shot, and I think if we monitor it, we can learn and it'll be fine. But I had some ideas that maybe we could place the sand in some interesting ways and anticipate that we might do it again in the future and maybe try to improve the surfing. One of the problems when you place sand, it tends to feed back on the wave patterns, and it can actually initially harm the surf patterns. And so it's just an idea, it's an opportunity to play around perhaps and get the community involved, and hopefully it'll be a positive experience. Next, but go back. There are rocks right here, so I show a little arrow going left here, but there are some rocks you have to watch out. So this is an example of beach nourishment. So now I'm going to go through these alternatives and just talk a little bit about them. So this is beach nourishment. It's a picture of San Diego, Carlsbad. There's a pipe here. The sand's slurried in water, and it's pumped, and then it discharges. The water runs away, and the sand drops out, and the beach gets wider. And then the waves move the sand around. That's basically beach nourishment, or sand bypassing whatever. You can place sand. You can also place sand mechanically if you have it from upland sources, and that you can build dunes. A little harder to do that from the water. But anyway, you can place it higher up on the beach profile. This is a beach profile of the ocean here. You can try to place it in a thin layer, or you can place it offshore. Some of the opportunities, we have sediment in the harbor, so we know where the sand is. That's great. Is there any offshore sediment? We're going to need more sand than what's in the harbor. That's not going to solve everything, I think. So I don't know, James, is this in your report? Did you guys find sand offshore?
The USGS has done, they're leading that California State Water Snapping effort, so I believe they did map this.
Okay. So everyone's going to be looking for sand. You can also get, you use larger materials, there's other things. There's some constraints, permitting, this is new work, so until we do it once and we show that it works, it's been hard to get permitted. What we're finding is there isn't enough sand for everything everybody wants to do. And there probably won't be enough sand through the future with sea level rise. There are some adverse effects when you place sand on beaches, and they're temporary. But if you do it frequently enough, all you have is sand. You really don't have anything living in it. So there are some ecological negatives with a lot of sand placement. Next, here's an example of this. James mentioned they looked at placing sand along the beach, and here's some examples of where this has been done recently. This is Goleta Beach down in Santa Barbara, looking west from the pier. This is about 2 months or so, or maybe longer after they placed the sand. And what's happened is the waves sort of erode the sand embankment and it widened the beach. And the sand's moving away, but until it does move away, there's a wider beach and the back shore doesn't erode. So it has a temporary benefit on a couple levels. This is South Ocean Beach in front of the sewer treatment plant. Something I've been involved in for a long time. Surfrider Foundation and Save the Waves, and a bunch of people got them to do this instead of placing rocks back in 1999. And we're still doing it. The sand moves away pretty quickly. We've got a longer term plan that I'll talk about later. So these are things that have been done in other places, and you could try them here. Next slide. Okay, so this is my goofy idea about rerouting Deer Creek. I got this idea when I was working for Peter Grinnell at the Harbor District, looking at, back in 99, I think it was, looking at what to do with all the sand that dropped out on the boat launch ramp in the 97, 98 El Nino. So we're looking at trapping the sand and stuff. And then, so what happens is Deer Creek comes down, and these little, you can see the trees, and it goes under the road, and then somehow it gets out of here, and when it really rains hard, it's just all over the place, and sand drops out all over the place. So the idea was to maybe daylight it, take it out of this culvert, and run it down this corridor parcel, down into this low area, maybe have a little wetland there, and then one way or another get it out to the beach. So just at least that sand from that creek, which occasionally is not a small amount, would go straight to the beach south of the harbor. You wouldn't have to dredge it. Right now it ends up in here, and it's been taken upland. You like the sand? Oh, you like the idea? Oh, okay. Well, it could be a nice park for people. You know, it could be, birds and, plants, and you could hang out there and have picnics or whatever. You'd have to get it underneath the road, which...
There's a culvert right where you drive.
Yeah, there is a culvert near there. So anyway, okay, I got through that. Anyway, just think about it. So next I do a lot of these multi-objective projects. To me, that's not, as an engineer, I've done this up and down the coast. It's really, if it works for you guys, you could probably get funding and you could probably do it. Somebody would have to look at it more closely to see if it really pencils out. I haven't done that, it's just a concept. Yeah, the ground slopes that way, so, it should work. Anyway, now let's get into these sand retention structures, which the idea of these structures is to slow down the longshore transport of sand. Very controversial. There's been a lot of problems on the East Coast with these things. Hundreds of feet of offset of erosion and lost homes and all kinds of crazy stuff. But, in some places they may work, and the idea is that if the sand's moving mostly this way, you get sand depositing on one side, you tend to get erosion or an adjustment on the other side. If sand is moving just back and forth, which is kind of more of what's happening here, until you get close to the jetty, in which case it is mostly coming in one direction. But you can get these weird kind of rip currents, and then the structures don't work. The surfers might know of Newport Beach, where there's a lot of these jetty structures, groins they call them. And so they can be good for surfing. It's not necessarily a negative. It kind of breaks up the surf. Next slide. Another idea, and I'm not advocating any one of these, another idea is an offshore breakwater. It's just a big rock wall and it knocks down the waves, slows down the sand transport. The sand tends to stay. There's lots of negatives that people can come up with. It's not done that often anymore. There are some examples down in the LA area that you could look into. Next slide. Another idea is what we call a multi-purpose reef. This is an offshore breakwater that's kind of sexed up a little bit, so it's kind of fun and looks cool. It does kind of the same thing, but it's below the water level, so waves can go over it. If you look at the next slide, this is an example of a surfing type offshore breakwater reef. So this is a plan view where this is the original beach line, and the idea was the waves breaking on this. If it's done right, the beach will equilibrate wider, and the sand will tend to stay there, but the waves will come in and break and then peel off on either side, and this is kind of a section view where you shape this thing so you can get nice surfing. This is an idea that a lot of people have been putting kind of the paper, and they've tried it a couple times. Turns out you really have to make a very big structure for it to work, and nobody's really done it in California yet, so it's experimental. I just put it out there. Next slide. Armoring. Well, this is the normal reaction when you build a wall or a rock revetment. You already have the rock revetments. This is Pleasure Point, and this is a reinforced concrete wall constructed in a way to make it look nicer. Pleasure Point, East Cliff Drive. Next slide. And here's that same location. This is where you walk down to jump out to surf Pleasure Point. So you can see this is all artificial here. It's made to kind of look nice and to like. Just a word of caution, this is where I live up in Pacifica. You know, sometimes things don't turn out the way you thought they would, and you know, we don't have a beach here at Beach Boulevard anymore. And you know, I think a lot of people are fine with that. Some of us aren't, especially if you lose your surfboard. It gets pretty messy. So there's some pros and cons. Next slide. And this is Beach Boulevard this winter. So I'm just standing on the pier, and I have a whole series of shots that's pretty interesting. But here's you know, wave run up that hit this break, this seawall, and it came over. You know, there's reports of kelp on the roofs this year and halfway back and stuff like that. But here's a blow up of this little site, and this is just one of the pictures. But you can see the water goes pretty far in, and then this location here is actually where this hole was punched in the seawall this year, and they put rocks in it, and now it's fixed. So it wasn't fatal, but there were some people that were pretty worried there. And so armoring can fail. It's not. Once you go down that road, you know, you're going to have to maintain that structure. And as an engineer, I can tell you, it's probably not going to work as well as you think it is. And if I design it, I'm going to definitely tell you that, because I don't want you to sue me if something weird happens. So just think about that. I'm not negative on armoring, but I think it's something to remember. Next slide. So this is accommodation, structural modification. This is Stinson Beach. These houses have walls, and these houses are on piling. And this is more of an East Coast and Gulf Coast thing where they deal with the hurricanes and the big storm surge. But you can also do it here. You can put your deep foundations and put your structure so that the waves kind of run under it, under the worst storms. And then the rest of the time, you know, it's okay, right? And so that happens. And so it's and actually FEMA allows this type of foundation in a hazardous zone if your community participates in the flood insurance program. So there are guidelines and stuff, so this is definitely doable. And you can modify your house, like these houses here. I know it sounds crazy, but you could put them on piles, you could lift them up, this is part of what we call structural adaptation or accommodation. You could also make the wall higher. That would also be change the shape of the wall. Those are also accommodation, structural adaptation type approaches. So there's a whole suite of those that you can go after. Next slide. This is Pacifica on Esplanade. This is where the homes were lost in 97, 98. There was a big rock revetment placed at the bottom. Despite that, this year, the 2 homes that remained are now red tagged. This person lifted their home, and they're waiting to figure, and moved it back, and they're waiting to figure out where to take it. So this is another structural accommodation or structural modification accommodation approach where you move out of the way. You don't necessarily leave your property or leave your house. Maybe just move, to adjust. Next slide. Now managed retreat. So this is a tough one, but managed retreat is actually not an alternative, it's a strategy. It's an application that can include everything: armoring, sand placement, allow erosion. And, I hate to say it, but I think it's probably what we're all going to be doing. If we actually get 3 to 6 feet of sea level rise, anyway, we can put off worrying about it, but I just think about it. Just think about it a little bit. But the idea with managed retreat is that you phase it in over time, realign infrastructure or the infrastructure function. You reconstruct something farther landward. Relocate and compensate at-risk development. I added and compensate here because we have very strong private property rights, and the reality is we are communities, right? So I think if we are talking about people moving, then I would expect that the only way that's really going to work is if there's some sort of community-based approach. It's just my judgment call on that. There's a couple of ways you can do that with rolling easements, relocation incentive programs, transfer of development rights programs, acquisition, just buying the property, and then basically over time you kind of adjust. Next slide. So what would that look like here? This is a slide I got from a presentation by the Corps, but it was put together, at least it's modified from Ken LaJoy's work, and Ken is a great guy. I don't know if Ken's here. I haven't seen him in a while, but I really like Ken. Anyway, I think he's probably right. He estimated that if we don't do anything and there's no armoring, the shore would attain some sort of hook-shaped bay right through this area so that the shore would just erode. And that's a result of the breakwater construction. That perturbation, that little additional hook-shaped bay up there is because of the breakwater construction. I'm not advocating that, but just an idea of what we're dealing with. Next slide. So how is managed retreat done? Conceptually, let's say we have a case where there's buildings and development and utilities, and let's say somehow that's bought or people move, or in the case of Pacifica, the house is red tagged and then demolished. And then you try to restore the back shore so that it's a little more functional and it provides some benefits in terms of absorbing wave action instead of causing reflection and scour. And then over time that moves back, and then you just, you do what you have to do when you have to do it, or maybe just beforehand. You don't go too fast or too slow. So that's the idea of managed retreat. It's the opposite of just retreating. It's kind of, well, not the opposite, but it's kind of a thoughtful, adaptation instead of adaptation. It's a thoughtful, planned out approach. Next slide. So this is at Ocean Beach, San Francisco. I showed pictures earlier of placing sand on an area just south of where these pictures are taken, where it's more of a bluff. And that's this interim kind of management plan that's going on. It's fairly expensive, but it's providing some benefits. This is a picture of this area in the 90s after a bunch of sand was placed and some nice landscaping was done. This is a picture about 10 years later. You can see the edge of the parking lot here, and these are different scales, but basically the beach is gone and the parking lots have been receding ever since. So the plan here is to remove all the surface improvements, the parking lot and the road for this one section. And there is a large 14 foot diameter sewage tunnel. It actually stores the sewage when it rains. main function. But the idea is to build a low-profile wall and to remove the fill, place sand, and then keep placing sand and create more of a park environment, and maybe put some cobble here for a dynamic revetment. So that's managed retreat. It has a pretty expensive wall. The infrastructure's maintained. What's not necessary is moved out of the way, and so I just want to stretch your thought process about what managed retreat might be. Next slide. So in terms of rolling easements, some of the mechanisms, one way that you can look at change is to say, well, the public owns this out here in the water like it's a navigable, Old English navigable, public trust, right? That only goes to mean high tide or something like that. But let's just say we own this publicly, and it's like Pac-Man, right? As the shore erodes, it just eats everything up. It's not a real pleasant thing, but still the public owns this. And that's one way to affect retreat. So that's called a rolling easement. You can purchase the right to help people move and deal with it. Anyway, next slide. Another way is a public easement where you purchase it on a piece of property and say, okay, we're going to pay you not to develop this piece of property. And of course that only works until the erosion reaches there, and then you have another problem. It's kind of like the development setbacks that are in place in a lot of communities that work for a while, but then eventually, not sure what happens. Next slide. So, going through all those solutions or concepts that could be employed, and again, they can all be mixed and matched into a hybrid. Each community needs to decide what they want to do, and it's not going to be easy. But my recommendations are to bypass sand from the harbor. I don't know, it just seems like that's a logical first step. I think you're going to need interim management. You're already doing that. Caltrans is armoring the road. There's armor here, so you're dealing with the erosion and protecting your property and infrastructure. So I see that as an interim management. I think additional sand placement could be another interim management step that might buffer some of the effects of the armoring. But then I think you really need to go into an adaptation scenario planning process, so that as a community you can maybe look at these different alternatives, beach nourishment, placing sand. I like my pet idea. It probably isn't going to work, but I'll throw it in there. I think eventually we'll have to look at Highway 1. You can build a seawall or armoring there, but eventually the water's just going to come over the top, and that'll be kind of interesting, right? Going 40 miles an hour and trying to time it. It can be kind of fun. It may not happen for a while, but I just thought I'd throw it in there. And then I think accommodation of coastal structures. So you're probably going to look at enhancing your armoring. You're probably going to look at raising walls. I mean, those are kind of things that people do, right, at first. But you might then start looking at other things, like perhaps if you do have room on the property, moving your house back. I know that sounds really crazy. Or maybe lifting it up. Those are things that could get you through most of the century, let's say, potentially. So I don't think it's crazy to think about that if you're worried about sea level rise. There are things that you can do that don't change everything. And then I think ultimately you're going to be looking at some sort of managed retreat. But I think you probably want to look at that as an option and maybe to decide that's too extreme. I don't know. Anyway, next slide. I think that's it. So, yeah. Are there any questions? Did I offend anyone? If I haven't offended anyone, I haven't done my job yet.
In both your presentation and previous presentations, you're the first one to mention bypass. But generally bypass, don't you look at a pipeline from inner breakwater and just pumping the sand, having a basin to trap the sediment and pump the sand over the breakwater?
Yeah, bypass is a bit of a misnomer because for this case, because that refers to sand moving in one direction being interrupted and then you mechanically bypass the blockage. But yes, I mean, that's one way you can move the sand from the harbor. You can have a fixed sand dredge plant You could have a floating dredge that's just out there and it just moves it.
Or just a pipe.
Or just a pipe.
And then when you need it, bring in a dredge and pump it over the breakwater.
Right.
It puts it right where the erosion is occurring, and then let the current take it down.
No, that's exactly right. It's really not that complicated. Santa Cruz has their own dredge, little dredge. Santa Cruz Harbor, Monterey Harbor has a little dredge. From an engineering standpoint, it's not that complicated to do. It's actually pretty cheap to move the sand from the harbor to the beach.
Studies of Oceanside, they had redesigned, I don't know if they had built it, redesigned a bypass.
Did you repeat the
Right.
question?
The question was to explain the term bypass and to comment on how easy it might be to just pump sand from one side, from the harbor side to the beach side. And I think you heard my response. It's pretty easy from an engineering perspective. Okay, it's been a long night. Thanks a lot. Oh, do you have a question?
Does beach sand have to be silica? Can it be a mixture with DG?
Decomposed granite?
Yeah.
You know, I think that you're talking about grain size, texture, density, hardness. Yeah, no, most people, from a regulatory standpoint, you probably want to have sand that's similar to what's on your beach. I think we might get beyond that at some point because I think sand is going to become more and more scarce. So if you have a good source, I think you should look at the source. See if you can get it permitted and see how it would work for you. Yeah.
Up in the gallery.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. A question for James.
Yeah.
So in your analysis, you were talking about models that assume sort of an average,
Right.
as opposed to the OCOS model that had a lot of variation in it. And I wonder how sensitive your conclusions about economic feasibility are to the assumption of average rather than the variation.
Yeah, it can cut both ways. I mean, the economics could look really good if the sand stayed around a lot longer, if conditions were calm. Sorry? My words.
Ed.
Ed. I'll take it. Thank you. Sorry. Yep. So, yeah, if you look at the extremes, it could cut both ways. I mean, that's probably kind of why we went for the average. I mean, in a strong El Nino event where the sand washes out really fast, probably not going to get you as good benefit numbers, and vice versa if you have calm conditions. But we didn't really, given kind of the limited funding and scope of the study too. I mean, we didn't have the wherewithal to really run down all the numbers, but we just kind of went with what we could do in the amount of time and scope.
So we got a lot of policy questions, which I think we'll take when we have a meeting on actual policy, if you guys don't mind, because this is more a discussion about the science and the engineering. Some of the policy questions were things like, when will we ever actually do something about the problem, stuff like that. As you can tell, that'll be a long meeting, but based on what Bob was saying, it'll be an important meeting to have, and you guys brought up some pretty good alternatives, I think. So I'm going to read a few of the questions, but I think we have enough time. If you raise your hand, you can also ask some questions. So here's a policy question. So one question is, if the harbor caused the problem, how come the harbor isn't responsible? Another policy question. I think all of us really want to see a solution to the problem, I can see from the questions. And so another policy question, how can the county continue to, can't read the writing. Sorry. How about if we just take hands, because I can't read some of the writing, and almost all of these are policy. So if you could hold the policy questions to the next meeting, that would be great. So yes.
So I have a science question for Dan. Yeah. So in one of your slides, you had two areas where there was a lot of cliff erosion. Pillar Point, which I think I now understand from the last presentations, and Martin's Beach. Why is Martin's Beach eroding so fast? Or so much faster than everything else?
I will tell you, I don't know. Honestly, I can show you the data. I haven't actually read the whole report. There may be people here who do know. Does anybody know?
Well, I suspect that what happened in Martin's Beach is that when they put down the artificial revetment, the rock.
Before that, years before.
Oh, years before that.
You're talking about the data that was from that report that was up through 1998, that I showed the bar graphs. And yeah, so you can get that report online and look at the methodology. It was a fairly straightforward method of going into the aerial photos and then manually digitizing the edge of the cliff and then looking at the change. You need to probably look at the actual area, and I'm not sure even with that, because the report is for the entire California coast, how well you can resolve the smaller areas, because they've got those little lines in there. But if you really want to know, if you email me, I know the person who wrote the report, and I can probably dig something up for you. Okay?
On the aerial or the profile view that you showed, that landslide area, it looked on the 2002 picture, it looked like you had a lot of green vegetation, trees and shrubs right at the head wall where that thing slipped, which might indicate there was a lot of water going on there.
You're very observant. I actually, I just noticed that like in the last couple of days myself, because I haven't seen it, and I had the same thought. That area is pretty dry. I don't know if you've ever been up on the top of Fort Funston. There's no infrastructure there to speak of, so it's kind of a curiosity, but there was a lot of vegetation in there, and maybe the roots of the vegetation, for whatever reason, contributed to the initial slip. To my knowledge, nobody's been out there to really check it out.
I suspect it was just the opposite. You had water drainage weakening that face. The vegetation was there because of the water.
Yeah, could well be.
If you want, you can look at the aerials and determine if those are willows. If those are willows up on top, you've got a wet area.
Are there willows on top of Fort Funston? It's pretty scrubby vegetation.
I actually did some planting, some revegetation work, not at the cliff face, but back from there.
Okay. Well, that's an easy spot to get to. It's right close to the parking lot, so we could easily go check it out. All right, in back.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about how rising sea level resulting in saltwater intrusion and rising groundwater levels will affect the strength of the bluff?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was, could I talk about how rising sea level would affect saltwater intrusion and then the groundwater levels affecting the bluff? Yeah. That's interesting. You should ask me that. Have you read my paper? We just wrote a related paper looking at this sort of ancillary problem that hasn't really been thought about, that as sea level rises in areas where there is groundwater that is seeping out through and is in contact with that seawater, is actually floating on top of it. So that there's actually areas, and this was first demonstrated in Hawaii, where there's a very permeable substrate and where the water supply actually is floating on all of that seawater underneath the islands. And they actually showed that there's areas where as sea level rises, you're going to get water percolating up through areas in the Alawai Harbor area and things that you wouldn't have expected. With the ground's going to get all spongy. So we actually did a study looking at the coastline here and looking for places that were low enough and also probably had groundwater where that might happen. They weren't areas where we were looking at bluff failure though, so that's the difference for your question. So to address your question, I think Pat Limber, the guy I talked about who's working on the bluff models, I'll ask him that question. I suspect the answer will be that that's a level of sophistication that they're not ready for yet, that they haven't even explicitly included rain in those models in terms of saturation of the rock, which obviously is going to affect rock strength. It is in their models in the sense that as they run the time series forward, they do have rainfall in there, so they end up calibrating the model to match historical bluff retreat rates, including a parameter that has the rain. So there's some indirect effective rain in there, but there's no mechanistic representation yet of how that moisture is going to affect bluff failure, even though, as you point out, we know it will. So that's something to think about. Way in the back? Down this way? Yes.
First of all, I live in the harbor, so please don't get rid of the breakwater. I didn't see any reference to the impact of the reef that comes off the point that it makes. It seems like that reef, when I look at pictures of it in the topographical maps and the navigation maps, it looks like that reef is actually protecting the breakwater. So you know, how come I don't see anything showing how the sand is moving with the reef? Has anyone done a study on that?
Bob, you want to talk reef? Or you want
Yeah, I
James?
could address that.
So the question was, what about the reef offshore here, that the one that's parallel, or the whole Mavericks complex?
The one that comes right off the point that we have to go around when we navigate in.
Right. Yeah, no, there's a big reef offshore here for sure. And I haven't really seen a good study of sand transport in this area, but looking at other hook-shaped bays, there's probably some sand that comes down the coast and slowly comes across the bay and lands, reattaches to shore somewhere in this vicinity. That breakwater might interfere with that. But Port St. Louis area has a similar setup, and there's been studies that have showed that sand comes all the way across the bay and attaches to shore to the south. But there has been a lot of sand that's come across the breakwater and into the harbor from the lagoon area there, it looks to me, over the years before the Corps put that concrete wall in at the foot of the breakwater. So there is sand coming around the corner there.
But it doesn't seem like the breakwater is the problem, because the reef's already there. That's what that was.
Yeah, no, the reef has been there, and of course the sea level rise, that's a whole other thing to think about. But no, I think the main issue is much more local, where the sand is trapped in the harbor that comes out of the creeks, and then secondly, the wave reflection off the jetty has changed the equilibrium of shore landform, so it's eroding here. I mean, I think that's my opinion anyway. Yeah.
So this is a really easy one. Do we have your slides?
Yeah, mine. I think they're going to be posted.
All the slides will be posted on the NCC website.
Okay, can I have a follow-up? So I'm a former oceanography, ocean engineering student, and I'm curious. I've been looking at it lately. What is the more expensive, or like the tier of cost for the near foot of coastline or whatever? Is it like armoring's the most expensive, then revetment, then or like what's the order?
Yeah. So the question was, what are the relative costs of the different adaptation strategies that we looked at, the armoring versus the sand placement and retreat and all that? It really depends on what you account for and what you don't account for. I like to say that if you look at it like an economist would, and we've just done a couple studies on this, if you look at and you consider the environment, armoring is like the most expensive thing, and it usually doesn't pencil out that well on an eroding shore because you lose the beach and all kinds of things. But if you look at it like a property owner, and you look at, that environmental impact is an externality, and you get the benefit, then you have a different set of books. You account for the benefits and costs differently. Or if not to pick on private property, if you manage a road and your mission is to protect your road or your sewer line. So in a way, it's very simple, and it's really the question that we have to answer. But it's complicated because it depends on how you account for certain things.
Yes.
Hi. I'm wondering, instead of putting the hole like you did in the middle of the breakwater, why not the very end? Take the end, because it goes right up to the cliff where the beach is, and then wouldn't the sand just come down the beach?
So the question was, why not separate the end of the breakwater from the beach, basically put the gap right there? Yeah, that was talked about. I really don't think it's going to work. The reason being that there's more of a forcing mechanism to push sand into the harbor than out. And think about it like a little depression in your patio, and you're sweeping sand back and forth. The sand's going to end up in that depression, and it's not going to come back out unless you really dig it out. And that's kind of what happens with the harbor. The sand gets in, it just doesn't come out. It's a trap. There's just not enough to push it out. And there's not much sand up against the jetty now, so you can remove the breakwater, and maybe some of the sand would move from that beach over. And so you'd have a new equilibrium that might be better than the way it is now. But it's not. I don't think the sand would really get too far south. I don't think it's the solution myself.
Would it open it up and let it flow?
But they could have a benefit, but I don't, I think there's a number of problems with it, and I thought the Corps looked at that. I don't know if somebody from the Corps wants to comment.
I'd like to follow up on that.
Go ahead.
This multi-part part that I submitted on the card, but the modeling needs to include what happens to the flow if you breach the breakwater and you've moved that giant mountain of sand that belongs on Surfers Beach over to Surfers Beach. So that's one thing that it sounds like was not considered in the modeling. But the other thing is a really simple question. You know what a duckbill valve is? Breach the breakwater.
Looks like this.
Yeah, it's well known to sewer engineers. You breach the breakwater, put in a duckbill valve, and the sand will flow out, and nothing will be able to go back in.
You know, it's interesting that you're suggesting that there would be a head difference, and that head difference would tend to open up the duckbill valve pump. Yeah, maybe. I got to tell you, I think that the best thing to do is move the sand out of the harbor and then seal the jetty and don't let it go back in. I mean, that's just my feeling as an engineer. I think that's the most direct thing to do. Unfortunately, with the harbor there, you're going to have to keep moving the sand. And once you get past the first pulse, it's the rate of sand deposition is not going to be enough to counter the wave reflection. So it's not really a full solution. It's just a partial solution.
Can you possibly add something artificial to give push to the sand in the harbor if you made an opening rather than, because I understand.
It's called a dredge. Sorry. There's been agitation dredging ideas and stuff, but really you don't really want a lot of agitation in the harbor. I mean, because you have boats and stuff. So.
We'll take one more question. You had a question behind it. Yeah.
So the amount of sand, is it changing with climate change, drought, and all that stuff that's coming in?
That's an excellent question. We don't know. The precipitation response to climate change is uncertain. What we're seeing is, when you use these global climate models, then you start getting to this whole other level of uncertainty about the different models and how they respond. And so you have what we call method uncertainty. So there's inherent variability, but now with future projections, you have this whole other thing and you don't know if it's real or not. But what we're seeing is more intense precipitation, but less precipitation in a lot of California where we've looked at it. And so flashy, but from water supply, not great. What effect that'll have on sediment supply, I don't know. We have historically seen reduced sediment supply due to development, and like in Pacifica, all the creeks are in culverts. There's almost no sediment supply locally to the beaches. I gotta believe that's not good for our beaches. Dams trap sediment. So historically, we have reduced sediment supply to the coast.
I think that's it for questions. Thanks everyone for coming. Oh, Sabrina, we gotta let her lead.
Thank you. So I have a question. This is for James and maybe also for Bob. So I was wondering if you could tell us if the Army Corps of Engineers looked at potentially breaching the breakwater, especially potentially putting in a culvert to run a dredge pipe through or something simple like that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, we did look at the breaching. That was the notch measure that we described there, and that was basically, as Bob was describing, the problem that there's just less energy in the harbor than outside of it, so the sand wants to go inside the harbor through there. But in terms of setting up more permanent dredging operation, we qualitatively discussed it in the report. It's just one of those things, the more operationally complicated you make something, less likely it is for it to, if it requires more maintenance long term, we kind of generally try to avoid doing that. But it is something that, a lot of harbors, they have their own dredges that do that, like in Santa Cruz. But, I can't speak in terms of the cost and who would pay for it. And I know people had questions about the benefit cost ratio, and I did finally get kind of the cheat sheet with the numbers. The benefit cost ratio is typically you want to show that it's at 1 or above, right? Like the benefits are equal to or greater than the costs. What the core report is going to show is that it's 0.25, and most of those benefits are actually recreational benefits because we're not able to capture the benefits of protecting Highway 1. And those are the kind of takeaway points that I wanted to make sure everyone heard before we left. And again, the report should be up on the website in a couple weeks, and I'll make sure that Sabrina, Ed, and everyone else who wants to get the word out will make sure that these are publicly available documents, that the public should be able to see at some point. But thank you again.
And just, I think, one positive thing that was in James's remarks that I want to make sure people didn't miss was that there is a pending grant application right now working with a consultant who's actually affiliated with the Marine Sanctuary to try to do exactly the preferred alternative in our plan. So, there is hope. It's just that we couldn't bring the federal dollars in, which was a disappointment to us. But, and that's why, the notch type solutions were really things we really wanted to see if they would work because we knew the benefits were small. We had to find a cheap solution to stay below the benefits, and we couldn't do it. But anyhow, so I think we're hopeful that Brad Blanket, Brad Davids's proposal will be successful, and then the Corps and GS and others, I think, have a lot of interest in the science of placement on that beach, and so I think there will be ancillary sort of federal dollars maybe on the science end of things, but the initial thrust is probably going to come from that grant application that Brad's working with. So keep our fingers crossed.
Okay, thank you. Let's thank our speakers once again. Thank you all for coming.